Okay, so welcome. Thanks for coming. My name is Ivor Prickett. I'm an Irish photographer. I'm based in Istanbul, and the show that you're going to see today is work that I've done over the past 15, 16 years in many different places, including Croatia, Serbia, Abkhazia, all over the Middle East, and then most recently in Ukraine. So it's 5 separate bodies of work that we've put together to make up the show. And you know, they're separate bodies of work, different projects, but they're all concerned with the consequences of war, the consequences of conflict. That's been my interest since I was starting out as a young photographer. So yeah, this is the first room, the first project, and the show is pretty much chronological. So this is some of my earliest work that I made in Croatia and Serbia in 2006 to 2008, and it was one of the first kind of serious projects that I did after graduating from university. I studied documentary photography in the UK, and this was a series, a project that I started while I was still in my final year of university, and then continued after I graduated, in the first couple of years after I'd graduated. And it's the story, the project is about the Serbian minority that lived in Croatia before the former Yugoslavia broke up. They were ethnically Serbs, but they lived in what is now Croatia. And during the war, towards the end of the war in 1994, 1995, they were displaced en masse because of the divisions that were, happening during the war. And the Croats pushed the ethnic Serb minority out of Croatia, and they became refugees in other parts of the Balkans, mainly in Serbia. And then when I came to do this series, it was more than 10 years after the displacement had happened, but people were still trying to come back, and there was quite a big initiative by the Croatian government, and it was all tied up with their hopes to join the European Union. It was one of the stipulations that they were given in order to join the EU, was to return their former citizens. But it was complicated because the divisions that had been fought over during the war were still present and still a problem in all over the Balkans. And so the Serbian families and people I was following were struggling to come back and reclaim their homes and rebuild their homes that were often still destroyed. So yeah, we can have a look around, and I can talk about a few of the pictures. And like I said, if you have any questions, just shoot. I think that's probably going to be the most interesting thing for you guys, if you can ask me, whatever you're thinking. So yeah, the project was 2 parts really. I photographed families who'd managed to return and were living in Croatia again, but I also spent time in Serbia with some of the people who were still displaced, living as refugees in Serbia, in collective centers, refugee centers that were still all over Serbia. And this woman, Stana, was one of those people who I met in a small refugee center in Serbia, where I lived for up to 2 weeks. I made several trips there, and spent time with there was just a few hundred people probably still living there, and she was in her 80s at that point, and was living alone in this old, very run-down former military barracks, and with very little care or support. You know, these were places that had existed already for more than 10 years, and I saw them as forgotten people. So yeah, it was an incredibly lonely, desolate place, but at the same time, as I've often found doing my work, there was a certain warmth or you know, homeliness that people can create no matter where they are in their space. So this was her room where she lived and slept, and you can see on the line above her bed, these are dried herbs that she would collect in the woods around the camp to make tea, and you know, she was somehow surviving, and I really, yeah, I spent a lot of time with her. And there's another picture of her here walking through the forest near the camp to collect water. And then this is the other kind of part of the work. One of the pictures that I made in Croatia with a young family who I also spent a lot of time with. She was actually Croatian, and her husband, who's lying on the bed, was Serb, and he had returned back to Croatia and met his younger Croatian partner, and then they'd married and had a son. And her family were so against the fact that she'd married a Serb, they didn't speak to her anymore, and they just lived this very, very simple, quite run-down life in one of the former Serbian villages that people had been displaced from. And yeah, I spent a lot of time with them over the course of 2 years, probably made 3 separate visits to them. I would live with them in their small two-bedroom cottage that was formerly his grandmother's home that they were trying to rebuild, and just, you know, documented their daily life. This is how I was working at that time, or you know, how I thought I could make something interesting about what these people were going through, was to just spend time with them and photograph their domestic life. It was quite a simple approach in many ways. It's funny looking back at it now, this you know, long down the line, and I haven't shown this work in a long time, so when it came to making the exhibition and I had to go back and revisit this work, it was difficult because I look at it now and it's quite simplistic and almost naive in many ways, but yeah, I think the you know, the premise and the themes that I was exploring are still relevant today. Yeah. But any questions?
So this was kind of it was like referred to in the essay and materials we received that sometimes you would live with your subjects.
Mm-hmm.
So was this kind of that period, and would they ever kind of share with you how they would want to be depicted? Or?
That's a good question. Yeah, this was definitely that period in my kind of early days of my career, where I really sought out to spend time with the people that I was photographing, and I still try and do that, but the way I work has changed a bit, and when I look back at it, I think that effort, that desire to spend time with people on a very intimate level was also because I was trying to build up my confidence as a photographer, and found it very hard to go up to people and ask them if I could take their pictures, and I was quite shy when I was younger, and photography had become this way for me to connect with people, and that's one of the most amazing things about photography, is that it's an excuse to go up to people and talk to them for no reason and ask them to go inside their home, and I found that fascinating. But in terms of their involvement in how I depicted them, no, there wasn't much discussion on that level, because I was a documentary photographer, and I still am quite a purist in that sense. So I would just say, listen, I want to live with you and just photograph the way you live. I want you to pretend like I'm not really here. So all of the pictures that you see in all of the work, all of the different series are pure documentary observations, let's say. That's not to say that I didn't spend a lot of time just hanging out with them and chatting and getting to know them in a way that's more important than actually taking pictures, because that's what helps people relax. So if that answers your question. Yeah.
When you first approach people, are they generally receptive, or did you receive a lot of no's?
You'd be surprised. No, you'd be surprised. Most people are, pretty receptive, and this was a bit different than a lot of the kind of interactions I have nowadays, where I work a little bit. I work differently, and like I said, I'm not spending as much time with people as I used to. But with this, I didn't just rock up in a village and start knocking on people's doors. I worked through an organization that was helping to resettle people, and with UNHCR, who were organizing the repatriation of people, and they would kind of formally introduce me to people and help me kind of make that connection, and then I would meet them and say, listen, this is what I want to do. And yeah, I don't remember anyone ever saying no, and that's one of the other things I'm constantly amazed by as a photographer, is like the ability to just knock on someone's door and peer into someone's life. I think it depends where you're working as well. I mostly work overseas. I've done very little work at home in Ireland, but when I think about it, in Ireland or the UK, and maybe even it would be a bit the same here. I think it would be much harder to do what I did in Croatia, because we have. I think we have more barriers up as a society. If I imagine kind of walking around in Ireland taking pictures, I'd probably have a lot more trouble, I think, with people being like, oh, what are you doing? Why are you, creeping around taking pictures? But in a lot of the places I work, those suspicions or that guard isn't there as much, I feel. And you'll see in my more recent work, where I've been working more in war zones and places where there's a lot of stuff going on, then it's different again, because it's so dramatic and life is spilling out onto the street, it's different again. You know, you are, you know, in the middle of everything, and it's there to see, and it's easier again to approach people, and you know, to be allowed to work. But it's a good question. It's a very, you know, delicate negotiation in any context, no matter how fleeting. And I always, whether openly or, you know, whether it's implied, make sure that people are comfortable with me being there. You wouldn't be able to take good documentary pictures if people weren't comfortable, unless you were, you know, using a really long lens and no one knew. But I'm never doing that. I'm always up close with people, and they're very aware that I'm there, and there's some sort of, you know, agreement that this is okay. Yeah, but it's a good question, and when you see my later work, I think you'll want to ask that again, and like, you know, be like, well, how did you do this? How did you get into this situation? But yeah, maybe we can move on because it's quite a lot. Yeah, but any more questions?
Yeah. Did you have a translator in your team?
Yeah.
To break the language barriers?
Yeah. So with this work, either I hired translators if people didn't speak English, but with the young family that I was talking about, the husband spoke English in that context, so it was really helpful because I didn't need anyone, so it was just me, which is always better, you know, the less people, especially if you're talking about living with people and wanting to be a fly on the wall. But yeah, a lot of the time I'm working with translators and local producers, you know, who are helping you to find the things you're looking for, and yeah, your eyes and ears in many ways, because if you're a foreigner in a place, you're going to have far less understanding of what's going on, and so the people we work with on the ground are really important. You know, they make the work possible. Yeah.
And another question, did you ask people to pose for you to build the composition, to build the line and shadow around them, or some photos were made accidentally?
Zero posing or telling people what to do, or like, you know, influencing the scene even. Like I said, I come from a quite a strict tradition of documentary photography, and am only interested in taking pictures that are as natural as possible and uninfluenced by me. Of course, sometimes you know, or you can sense that people are a little bit aware or uncomfortable, or, you know, even doing things because you're there. And you also have to kind of build up an instinct to know when that's happening, you know, and then maybe not take that picture, or you do take that picture, but you know it's not quite real. But no, I don't control the scene at all in any of my work. That's the first room. We can go on, and yeah. This is a separate body of work that I did between 2009 and 2010, but it is in some ways connected to the work from Croatia and Serbia, in that it's a similar story. So this is about the Georgian minority. It's a bit complicated, but it's about a Georgian minority who ended up being cut off in a breakaway region of Georgia. I don't know if you know Georgia, but there are two parts of Georgia that have been annexed, let's say, or declared, self-declared independence from Georgia. This happened in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and Abkhazia is one of the breakaway regions of Georgia. It's on the Black Sea, kind of western side of Georgia, up to the border with Russia, and it's kind of broken off, separated from Georgia proper, but there's 30 to 40,000 ethnic Georgians who are still living in that region, and again they're living in part of a country that used to be theirs, where they're not entirely welcome. The majority in Abkhazia are Abkhazian, and they're more aligned with Russia, backed by Russia, and they don't really want the Georgian minority still there. So I felt like this was a continuation of the themes that I was exploring in Croatia and Serbia. This idea that no matter what, people want to go home, remain home, even if it's difficult and they're not wanted there. And so, yeah, I made two separate trips in 2010, and again worked through local NGOs and worked with good fixers and producers to help me find families who were interested in participating and allowing me to live with them and document their day-to-day lives. So it's in a similar vein to how I was working in Croatia and Serbia in my earlier career, all of this work at that time, including the stuff from Croatia, I was shooting on film. That's why they're square. It's a square format, medium format camera, and it's all shot on film, which is how I preferred working when I was younger. And if I had the choice, I would still be doing that, I think. But it's become incredibly expensive and difficult to, buy and develop film. And also, I work a little bit differently these days. I work more on assignment for the New York Times and magazines, and the culture of shooting film has just died out, especially if you're working for a client. I miss I miss working like this, to be honest. There's something really beautiful about going away for a month and working on a project and not seeing your pictures. It's so different now. We're shooting digital and we're looking at the pictures on the back of our camera. I try not to do that as much as possible because it can make you really lazy, and you'll think you've got a picture or you've got the story in the bag when in fact you don't. Whereas when you were shooting film, you never knew, and so you always, I think, work twice as hard to make sure you had the work in the bag. Yeah. But yeah, any questions about this work?
Well, about this and everything else,
Yeah.
There are displaced people all over the planet.
Yes.
What made you go to like Croatia and then here and all the other places?
Good question. Yeah, I think the Balkans was the first place I had the courage to go to as a young photographer. I actually went to Kosovo before I went to Croatia and Serbia, and that was while I was still in university. I knew I wanted to be a photojournalist, and I wanted to cover news and work for newspapers and magazines. But when I was in university and starting out, I didn't have the knowledge or the courage to know how to start doing that. So, and I'd grown up in Ireland. I'd traveled very little actually as a kid, and it was in my second year that I finally had the courage to go to Kosovo and work on my first project overseas. And I think I'd become very interested in the Balkans through the first couple of years of studying documentary photography. And I think it was because it was, and I was interested in, I knew I was interested in conflict and issues around conflict and displacement and humanitarian issues. And the wars in the Balkans were the closest war, to my kind of upbringing and in my memory. I remember being a kid in Ireland, and we would do fundraisers for people in Bosnia or in Kosovo. So I think it was in my conscience somehow. And then I became interested in it in university and started researching and writing. My dissertation was about the different ways in which the wars in the Balkans were documented. So that's how it started. And it was after that first trip in Kosovo that I heard about the issue of the Serbs in Croatia, and it was an unusual story for me. And I thought, and at the time, because I was starting out, I was really trying to find stories and do projects that I thought no one else was doing or had done, because I felt like that was my best chance of being recognized as a photographer and artist, rather than running off to the nearest hotspot where everyone else was going to be, which, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. People do that and it works, but to me it didn't make sense, and I wanted to go the opposite way to everyone else. And it was years before I actually ended up going to a kind of breaking news type situation where there were other photographers and journalists, and at this point I was looking for stories that hadn't been told. And I still think that's important, and I still try and do that even if I am working somewhere that's more in the news. If that answers your question. Yeah.
So is you going to more hotspot-ish type places these days? Is that like because magazines ask you to do that mostly? It can be in some cases. I do a lot of assignment work, but even though it's assignment work and it's stuff that people ask me to do, it's usually connected to, an editor or magazine will hire you on the basis of your wider body of work. They're not going to send me to do a story about, I don't know, marine life in the middle of nowhere. They're going to ask me to cover conflict. They're going to ask me to cover humanitarian stories. So it's a bit of both, but yeah, when we see the later, the more recent work, I'll explain it a bit more how it works now, because it's changed. My whole kind of way of working has changed. At this time, I was very much on my own, and I was working independently, finding grants, funding to do my work, because I didn't have the standing in the industry to get those stories assigned. I would publish the work after the fact in lots of different places, but I found it hard and it is hard to break through, you know, to get that to that point where editors, publications will send you to do the stories that you want to do. More often than not, you had to do them, prove that you could do it, come back with the pictures, and then they would be like, oh, actually that's quite good, and you know, maybe buy it off you. But now I'm in a position where I can pitch and people will listen, and I will get commissioned to do stories that I want to do, or I will get asked to go and cover a specific topic, but it's usually related to my personal work in some way, and they'll say, oh, we just want you to go and do this and do it in your, do it in your way, do it in your style. Yeah, if that makes sense. Yeah. Thanks. Any more? Should we move on? It's actually this way. This work is all about the Syrian refugee crisis that obviously started to unfold after the war in Syria broke out in 2011, and the displacement from Syria became the biggest refugee crisis in the world at the time. Millions of people were displaced, both internally and across Syria's borders. At that point, I was based in the region. I was living in Lebanon, and I'd covered the kind of outbreak of the Arab Spring in Egypt and Libya. So I was in the region and covering the events that had led to this mass displacement. But the war in Syria was very quickly incredibly dangerous, and although I wanted to go there, I didn't quite have the courage to do it, to cross into Syria and document the war itself, although a lot of my colleagues did. So I thought, well, this is a big issue, this is a big story in the region, how am I going to talk about it? And so I decided to focus on the people who had fled. So yeah, this is, it's a small part of quite a big body of work that is made in up to 10 different countries. Initially, I was working in the region around Syria, in Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and Turkey, where the biggest numbers of refugees had ended up. And I was working in, camps like this one in northern Iraq, informal settlements that are all over Lebanon, like this in the Bekaa Valley, where there's 2 million refugees living just across the border from Syria. in these very basic, informal tented settlements. And then, in 2014 and 2015, as I'm sure you all remember, the numbers of refugees seeking refuge in Europe increased dramatically, and that was largely because of the Syrian refugee crisis, because there were so many millions at that point displaced. And those routes, from Turkey and Bulgaria into mainland Europe have been there for years, and people have always used them. But in those years, in 2014 and 15, the numbers were just so great because of the Syrian refugee crisis. And that's why we saw these, dramatic scenes of people crossing the straits from Turkey to the Greek islands of Lesbos, and then making their way up through the Balkans, and ultimately, trying to get to places like Germany, which is where this picture was taken. And so I followed the story to Europe and followed the route, the migratory route that people were taking from the Greek islands all the way up through the Balkans, and then ultimately in places like Germany. It's quite a small selection of what is quite a big body of work, but that's what it's about. If you guys have any questions. Yeah.
Do you ever worry about the level of agency that they have in the photographs? I'm with this one in particular, with the woman who doesn't seem, or she seems unconscious.
Yes.
How do you navigate that? It's just personally.
Yeah, it's complicated, but in a situation like that, the boats arrived, and I was literally the only person standing on the shore when it happened, and I was photographing everyone who was being lifted in off the boat and scrambling ashore. And I guess you navigate something like that in knowing that the people around her who are with her are quite aware that you're there, and you're talking to them. And I interviewed them afterwards and spoke to them. And if anyone ever really has a problem and says, "What are you doing? Don't take my picture," and in this case, obviously it wouldn't have been her, it would have been her family members, but they wouldn't have hesitated to do it, especially because they're from the Middle East. But I would be able to speak with them in Arabic and say hello, and it's a difficult picture to look at, and hard to imagine how you can stand there and take that picture. But it's not like I've just popped out of a bush and started snapping away. It's kind of a slow process, and sometimes you even end up helping people if they need it. I remember, especially in that time in Greece, you would very often be the only person who was standing on the shore. There were no aid organizations, there were no police or emergency services, because the Greeks really didn't want this happening. So they were trying to make it as kind of difficult as possible for people, to the point where these days they actually actively push the boats back out to sea, which I'm not sure you've heard about, but this is a massive problem at the moment. And so you would be the only person standing there on the shore, and people would get to shore, and they would ask you, where are we? Where do we go? What do we do? And I would end up directing people to the nearest town, and in some cases would put people in my car who were injured or couldn't walk, because it was about a 15-20 kilometer walk to the nearest town. That's how you would navigate something like that, or justify it if it's justifiable. But like I said, very often people will be thankful that that you're there. Maybe a little bit unsure what's going on at first, and then you talk to them and you tell them you're a journalist. Can I speak to you? What's your name? And they tell you they want to talk. They want to tell you their story and what they've been through, more often than not. And if someone doesn't, and they say, "Don't take my picture. I don't want to talk to you," then I don't, and I won't use that picture. Yeah, but not every photographer is like that, and there are situations where it's not fair, and I've seen it, and I don't like it, and I've said it, Yeah, in these kind of situations where people are way too aggressive, they get in people's faces. I remember one night in the same period, because the boats would come in even at night, and we would sometimes be down on the beach at night, waiting to see people coming in. And I remember this one photographer pushing everyone aside and coming up to this family who were huddled on the beach having just arrived, and setting off this strobe flash and just being like, and they were getting blinded, and I was like, what are you doing, man? They've just fled war and managed to cross the sea to get here, and now you're up in their face with a flash. And we got into a big argument about it, and it's incredible what you see people do. But I try and be as respectful as possible, and it's a delicate balance, but yeah, I try my best. Yeah.
So I know you said that you weren't able to go to Syria at this time, but I think it is really important how you captured these moments in those years after, because the Syrian refugee crisis completely redefined how refugee crises were assessed and how humanitarian responses were conducted and everything, because it was such an intense movement of people, particularly with refugees going into neighboring countries at such high amounts, and with third world refugee migrations as well. I mean, third country migrations. But this is from almost more than 10 years ago now, or 10 years ago now, and the Syrian refugee crisis is so protracted, it's never going to end.
Exactly.
And particularly with the neighboring countries like Lebanon, that there are so many compounding crises. So I know you said your projects work differently now, but do you think you would ever go back and pick up the story of kind of the Syrian refugees 10 years later, especially within Lebanon with, the explosion and the economic crisis, that it's so different for them?
For sure, and then quite possibly, I'm going to write that down actually. Remind myself that I should do that. No, that's a really good point. And I live in Istanbul, and I'm sure you guys know about the massive earthquake that happened earlier this year and affected the border region in Turkey and northern Syria. And a lot of the people who were killed in Turkey were Syrian refugees, which is just hard to believe, the tragedy. After so many years of being displaced and being marginalized in Turkey, as much as they have accepted millions of refugees, they don't treat them so well. And yeah, the idea that they were the biggest victims in the earthquake was really hard to take. And I was down in the earthquake zone for a few different assignments, not for that long. I will say, personally, it was really hard to see. And sometimes, as privileged as it might sound, we also suffer from you know, the effects of doing these stories. And in some cases, I'm not saying that's the case with the Syrian refugee issue, but it's hard to go back and revisit stuff that you've done. You know, there's, you know, I think a lot of moral injury that comes with seeing all of this tragedy and hopelessness in situations like this. Although there were positive stories to be told as well, and I did tell them, but it does take its toll, you know, and so sometimes you need to finish your work as best you can and then move on. But it's a good point, and sometimes I do end up revisiting places and stories. But yeah, for example, we'll go into the next room now, which is all about the war against ISIS in Mosul and in Syria. And I remember after I finished, not that you know, it's that you feel you've finished. The story's never finished. The problems never go away. But as soon as I had kind of put an end to what I felt was my work, I couldn't go back to Mosul for years afterwards. I went back, like, for the first time 2 years afterwards, and I realized that it was because it had been such a tough time, and I'd seen so much destruction and death, and I'd found it hard to kind of face those memories again myself, and which is, you know, exactly what people who are caught up in these situations are going through. So it hits home, you know, when you feel like that as a person who, you know, flies in and flies out and, you know, gets to go home, is affected by that in some way. You can imagine what war does to people who are really caught up in it and have no way of escaping it. It's really hard to comprehend. Yeah. So, any other questions about this work?
I wanted to ask you, before you mentioned that you operate a selection of photographs, and I can imagine that also working with magazines and newspaper, you have to think about also what the viewer is ready to see.
Yes.
And how do you manage that?
Yeah.
Do you like censor your photograph?
I think you automatically do end up censoring your work and what you see a little bit, because most magazines and newspapers have certain limitations or, you know, stipulations as to what they can show. But I'm pretty lucky with the New York Times. They aren't afraid to show really hard stuff, but they're even, you know, with them there's a limit. And I think also with, you know, with myself personally, I have certain limitations that I don't want to cross, and that I feel people don't need to see. You know, we see all of these things, but there's definitely moments and situations where I know that won't be a palatable picture, and that won't help your, you know, your cause, that won't help your task of trying to get people to engage with this story. It will make them turn away. You know, some people might argue, well, that's the point. You know, you should make people spit their coffee out in the morning, and be so shocked. But I think you can go too far, and you can force people to, push people away from looking at a story if it's too harsh, if it's too difficult to look at. But I try and find the balance, you know, and not self-censor too much, or, you know, leave things out just because I think it's too rough for people to look at, you know. Maybe it'll make more sense when we look at the more, we're getting more and more into the front line in the next room, and yeah, that kind of question will be more, you know, more relevant with the work in the next room maybe. But it's good point. Yeah, should we go on? Yeah, you guys just have a look around, and then I can talk, or you can ask me questions. But this is all work that I shot in Iraq and Syria between 2016 and 2018, while the the fight to defeat ISIS was going on. ISIS controlled vast parts of Iraq and Syria from 2014 until 2018, 2019, even in Syria. And there was a massive military operation backed by NATO and fought by Iraqi and Syrian groups on the ground. And I spent months over the course of those years on the ground, very often embedded with the Iraqi army, with the Iraqi forces who were doing the fighting on the ground, but then also working in these places after the fighting had ended, and documenting the aftermath and rebuilding, and again this act of people trying to come home and reclaim and rebuild their homes that I talked about in my earlier work. And so this work and this time I think marks the biggest shift in what I do. And that's largely just in the sense that I went much further forward and became more of a war photographer than I ever had been. And I'd never considered myself a war photographer before, even though I'd covered stories that were all connected to war in some way. But this was the first time I was really on the front line and in a lot of dangerous situations while working. And the reason I did it, and I hope you can see the kind of trajectory through my work, is again largely because of the fact that civilians were caught in the middle of this fighting, and they were, as always, the people who were being affected most by it. So I wasn't interested in the act of war itself, but I was really trying to document and show what was happening to people who were caught up in this war, and it was a huge humanitarian disaster. Especially the war in Mosul. There were hundreds of thousands of people still living in the city. They'd been living in Mosul under ISIS for years, and the situation had got very bad. And then the military came in to liberate them, and in the process were killing lots of civilians, and even as recently as last year, I went back to Mosul and worked on a story for the New York Times Magazine about civilian casualties as a result of airstrikes that were carried out by NATO at the time. And we didn't really grasp it at the time, but yeah, they were carrying out these airstrikes targeting ISIS in the city, but in the process killed a lot of civilians who were just hiding at home in a basement, and there would be ISIS fighters running around on the roof of the building, and then they would drop a bomb and then collapse the whole building and kill a whole family who were hiding in the basement. And there was there had been no accountability. I think the British, even up until quite recently, claimed that they'd killed one civilian in the whole process of the 2 or 3 years of fighting against ISIS. So that's how I ended up doing this work, even though it's quite different to a lot of my previous work. Yeah, but yeah, if you guys have any questions.
So you said you also interview the people after taking their photograph.
Yeah.
So in the exhibition there's obviously no text except for like the name of the series.
Yeah.
When you publish them, do they come with text you write, or is that something
so
you refrain from? And what made you decide to show it this way?
So at the time, with this work in particular in Mosul and Syria, I was working on my own, as in not with a writer. Very often now, and this also marks the point where I really started working with the New York Times. But I was mainly working on my own, and so I was having to write as well, which was a new kind of task for me. Although I'd always written and interviewed people and gathered information as a photographer, I'd just never written actual articles for a newspaper before. So it was really daunting, but I would have to write the story to go with my pictures from all of these situations. But then, very often these days I'll work with a correspondent, and so we'll be a team and we'll go and we'll work together on a story. So I don't have to concentrate as much as I used to on talking to people. They'll be there talking to the characters that we're focusing on, and I'll be concentrated on taking pictures. But in terms of the text with the exhibition, there is actually a pamphlet that everyone's going to get when they come in with extended captions for every picture, because they like to limit the amount of text they put on the wall when they have these shows up. But I think it's a little bit difficult with my work, because every picture does have quite a deep meaning or story behind it. And so in the book, again, the captions are all there at the end of each chapter. And I published my first book about 3 years ago, after I'd done this work, called End of the Caliphate. And there's an introductory essay at the front of the book. Then under each picture there is the caption, because that's quite important for me. But this is a different context, which is part of why it's interesting for me, because I don't usually show my work in this way. I'm used to seeing my work in newspapers or online, and that's why it's been really interesting to to go through this this process with the with the show. Just even if you're like, what's going on in that picture? Which one? In this one. So it was a recently liberated area in Mosul. ISIS, had just been pushed out of that area further inside the city, maybe a day or two before, and the first kind of trucks with aid had come into the city because people had been living under siege at that point for many months, and the situation had gotten really bad in Mosul. There was no, there was no electricity. There was very limited water and food, and this aid truck came in, and I was inside the city on an embed with the military, and we just saw this crowd and truck coming in, and I said I wanted to go and see what was going on, and yeah, people just came from everywhere because they were so desperate to get whatever was being handed out, and they were just throwing out bags of rice and tin food, and yeah, that was that scene.
Photo to the right of it?
That's a similar similar sort of scene after a neighborhood in Mosul had been liberated, and an aid group was distributing food, and they split the line into women and children and men in another, again, they were just people who had remained in Mosul, had lived under ISIS, and were then coming out to receive aid. And it was really interesting. The young girl in the center of the image. A couple of years afterwards, this picture ended up in an exhibition in Iraq. For the first time, the World Press Photo brought the exhibition to Iraq, and a friend of mine was at the exhibition. He helped organize it, and someone came up to him and was like, "That's my relative," and he knew the girl in the picture, and he was able to tell him that she had survived. Luckily, she had survived the whole thing and was now living in northern Iraq. So, yeah. That was that.
In touch with people?
Some people, yeah. Some people through, very often it's through fixers, through the people who've helped do the work on the ground. But the couple from the first room, the picture from Croatia of the couple on the bed, and still in contact with them, for example, and their kid, their son is 16, 17 now. Yeah. As much as it's possible, it becomes harder the more you're working in this kind of environment where things are so fleeting, and it's harder to really stay in contact with people or follow them, because they're often on the move and you don't meet them at home, and it's dramatic, very dramatic moments where your connection is quite quick, it's quite short, which is difficult. Yeah.
You mentioned fixers. What does that mean?
It comes from the fact that they are your eyes and ears on the ground, and they will fix any problem you have. But it's a producer, like a local producer.
Got it.
Yeah, they can be your translator.
Okay.
Yeah, translator, local guide, fixer. Yeah. Okay, should we go on? Last room. So yeah, the last part of the show is work I've been doing in Ukraine over the past year and a half since the war in, since the full-scale invasion that started in early 2022. Although the war in Ukraine has been going on since 2014, the invasion that started last year was, much bigger in scope, and as I'm sure you all know, they were, the Russians were pretty close to Kiev at one point, and so it was, it was on a much bigger scale than what had been going on, I was asked to go in about 3 or 4 days after it had started. I wasn't there in the beginning, but I went in about 3 or 4 days after the war had started, crossed the border from Poland, and slowly made our way to Kiev, where we were based for the first 3 or 4 weeks of the war, as the Russians were bearing down on Kiev, and then was there in the Kiev region in the aftermath of the attempt to take Kiev, and saw all of the atrocities that had been committed in places like Bucha and Borodyanka, and then have made 4 other trips over the course of the last year to all different parts of the country, including to the east, to the Donbass, and to the south. This is in southern Ukraine on the Dnieper River near Zaporizhia, these are all from the same series, same story that we did, which was about this unit of special forces, Ukrainian special forces soldiers who were conducting nighttime raids across the river. So the river now, the Dnieper River, which runs down the whole kind of from Kiev all the way down through southern Ukraine and opens up into the sea, is the dividing line between the Ukrainians and Russians along the south. And so these guys were doing nighttime reconnaissance and sabotage operations across the river, got the chance to spend some time with them and see what they were doing, and mainly just seeing them at their base, and then seeing them as they would move out on these operations at night. I didn't go with them because it was a bit too dangerous. It was a really interesting challenge to try and make pictures in near complete darkness with zero light. The only light that they would use was one torch or a red lamp, which is much harder to pick up because they were afraid of drones or planes seeing them. So that's that triptych. But obviously this is an ongoing story. The war is still going on, and I'm still part of the team with the New York Times who are covering it. So I'll go back in the next month or so, and we'll continue documenting the war obviously from the Ukrainian side as it unfolds. But I'm sure you guys have been aware and keeping up with what's going on. If you guys have any questions about this, let me know.
Do you have a hard time separating? I mean, this is your work, this is your profession. You know, thinking about, oh, like leaving the office, you know, once I go home, I'm home. How do you, I can't do that with this.
Yeah, it's, well, I mean, when I'm there, when I'm on the ground working, there is no separation. But when I come home, I have one of the beauties of being a freelance photographer is that you are in charge of your own time to a certain extent. So when I come home, I have, you know, good periods of time off, and I really try and switch off, and I don't read the news, and I don't really think about my work, and I just like try and have as normal a life as possible before I have to go back. And that's my way of coping, because yes, it can consume you, especially if there's a big ongoing story like this, like the war in Ukraine, which I think has been on everyone's minds, you know, for the last year or so, and then even more so when you're in it, you know, and you become, you know, connected to people and connected to the story. It's very hard to switch off, as you say. But I've understood over the years that that's really important. It's really important for me to be able to get out and switch off, because it gets, again, that's a very privileged thing to be able to do, and I feel, you know, guilty somewhat that I'm able to do that, but at the same time it's integral to having longevity in this field. You know, you've got to pace yourself, because it's really taxing, and a lot of people burn out or get, you know, compassion fatigue or moral injury to the point where they don't want to do it anymore. They think it's pointless.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Like, has there ever been a point in your career where you've almost gotten to the point where, like, am I doing
every
the right
day,
thing?
every day.
Is this what I want to do?
Yeah. No,
especially as like the trajectory of like where you started when you were a younger photographer versus like these shots here that are like so raw.
No, I'm joking, not every day, but for sure have had moments where I questioned whether it's, you know, whether it's worth it personally, regardless of whether it's worth it generally, you know, or whether it does anything, or whether it's you know, worthwhile. But just from a personal point of view, I've noticed and I've watched the toll it's taken on people close to me, friends, you know, other people in the industry, and then personally noticed what it has done to me, and the sacrifices that I've had to make. You know, I've had to live this pretty unusual life, and I love it, but at the same time it's not conducive to a very healthy life. But I've gotten to a point now where I am very lucky. I have the platform of the New York Times to get my work out there, and I think if I wasn't, you know, if I hadn't got to this point and made that kind of breakthrough, which happened, like I said, in Iraq in 2017, 2016, I might have gone down a different path and found different ways of working maybe, but that getting that kind of foot in the door with them gave me a huge boost, and yeah, it's a very empowering thing, you know, if you are a concerned photographer who wants to work on you know, the kind of big stories that are going on in the world, and you have that platform, you have that outlet. It's incredibly empowering, and it makes you feel like, you know, you're on the right track, which is the biggest thing every photographer, artist will ask themselves, like, am I doing something that people care about? Is my work reaching anyone? Is it worthwhile? And so when you get that backing and you have that outlet, it justifies it to a certain extent, and it makes you want to get up, and it makes you want to do your best work. When I'm working for them and I'm on assignment, I really feel the weight, but in a good way, and that's what's kept me going to this point. But I think I'm aware that it could change at any point. I could decide quite suddenly that I'm done with this kind of work, because it's incredibly dangerous. It's very taxing, and the longer you do it, the higher the chance of something happening, or the harder it becomes to do something else as well. The longer you do something, the harder it is to change. But for now, I'm happy, and it gives me, my work, photography, has always given me the most purpose in my life, and so when I don't do it, there's a big hole in me, and even when I've been really fed up and frustrated and thought that it's not going to work, I just want to go. I want to go out and eventually start taking pictures again, because that's what gives me sustenance and meaning, So there's no escaping that, unfortunately. That's the problem. Yeah. So that's it. You've seen everything. Thank you for looking, and I hope it was interesting. If you guys, have any more questions, I'm willing to answer. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.